The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Even through the roar of the snowstorm battering my rental Audi on Interstate 87, I could hear it vibrating against the leather console. I knew who it was before I even glanced at the screen. Mum. The fifth voice message in the last hour, each one more frantic than the last. Your father is dying, Emily. He's asking for you. Please, you have to come home right now. He doesn't have much time left. The words were somewhere between a plea and a command, wrapped in that familiar tone that had controlled me for 29 years. But here's what you need to know right now. And this is where everything gets absolutely insane. When I pulled up to that house 3 hours later, fighting through 2 feet of snow and ice on the roads, there was no ambulance, no hospice nurse, no somber relatives dressed in black. Instead, every window blazed with light, and I could hear music and laughter echoing across the frozen lawn. My father, supposedly on his deathbed, opened the door with a tumbler of whiskey in one hand and a grin that could sell used cars. "Welcome home, sweetheart," he boomed, pulling me into a hug that reeked of bourbon. "We've been waiting for you. If you're already hooked by this nightmare, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel, because this story gets so much darker than you can possibly imagine. And drop a comment telling me if you've ever dealt with toxic family members who tried to destroy your life. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of how this ends. Let me take you back to where this really started, about 6 months before that terrible winter night. I need you to understand who I was and what my family had been doing to me for years, because what happened that evening was just the culmination of a lifetime of manipulation. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm a certified public accountant working for one of the top forensic accounting firms in Manhattan. I specialize in uncovering financial fraud, which is ironic, considering I was completely blind to the fraud happening in my own family. I'd always been the responsible one, the golden child who got straight A's, who put herself through college on scholarships and student loans, while my younger sister, Chloe, partied her way through a community college she never finished. I was the one who sent money home every month, who paid for Dad's dental work, and Mum's spa weekends, who covered Chloe's credit card bills when she inevitably overspent. My parents, Robert and Susan Stone, had always made it clear that I was the favourite. "You're our success story, Emily," Mum would tell me over the phone. "Chloe, well, she's still finding herself. You're the one we can count on." And I ate it up like the approval-starved daughter I was. Every wire transfer, every paid bill, every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, I told myself it was because they loved me more. I was special. I was valued. The truth was so much uglier, and it would take me years to see it. 3 months before the phone call that brought me home, I'd started noticing something strange. Credit card applications were being declined when I tried to open a new rewards card for business travel. My credit score, which had always been pristine, had dropped from 820 to 680. When I pulled out my credit report, my hands started shaking. There were 5 credit cards I'd never opened, all maxed out, totaling over $70,000 in debt. The billing addresses were in Connecticut, at my parents' house. The spending patterns showed luxury purchases, high-end restaurants, designer boutiques, none of which were mine. I called in the fraud department at each credit card company, my professional training kicking in even as my personal world tilted sideways. I filed police reports. I froze my credit. But I didn't confront my parents. Not yet. Some part of me, that desperate little girl who still craved their approval, wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe someone had stolen mail from their house. Maybe it was a sophisticated identity theft ring. Maybe. Then 2 months ago, Chloe posted photos on Instagram from her birthday party. My sister, who supposedly worked part-time as a receptionist at a yoga studio, was posing with a brand new Hermes Birkin bag, the kind that costs upward of $20,000. She was wearing diamond earrings that caught the light like tiny chandeliers. The comments were full of congratulations and envy, and one of her friends had written, "Your parents are so generous, love, that they spoil you." I felt something crack inside my chest. I pulled up my credit card statements again, the fraudulent ones, and started cross-referencing dates. The Birkin bag was purchased on May the 3rd on a card bearing my name. The earrings, May 17th. A luxury spa weekend in the Hamptons, June 2nd. Every single extravagant expense on my stolen credit lined up perfectly with Chloe's social media posts. My own family had stolen my identity to fund my sister's lifestyle. I should have cut them off right then. I should have pressed charges and walked away. But that's not how toxic family dynamics work, is it? There's always that voice in your head saying, maybe you're wrong, maybe there's an explanation, maybe if you just talk to them, they'll apologise, and everything will go back to normal. So when Mum called crying about how Dad had lost his job and they might lose the house, I listened. When she begged me to come home for Thanksgiving to discuss some important family business, I agreed. When she sent that string of panicked voice messages about Dad dying, I drove through a snowstorm because despite everything, some pathetic part of me still hoped I mattered to them. The house looked exactly the same as I remembered from childhood, a sprawling colonial in a wealthy suburb with a circular driveway and too many rooms for a family of 4. But as I stepped through the front door brushing snow from my coat, I realised this wasn't the quiet family meeting I'd been promised. The living room was packed with relatives, people I hadn't seen in years, all dressed in cocktail attire and holding champagne flutes. Aunt Patricia was there, the one who had never liked me, because I'd gone to a better college than her son. Uncle Jim, who'd borrowed $5,000 from me 3 years ago and never paid it back. And Chloe, of course, standing by the fireplace in a designer dress showing off that obscene Birkin bag to a cluster of cousins. "Emily, you made it," Mum said, appearing at my elbow with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was wearing too much perfume and too much jewellery, and her fingers were cold when she gripped my arm. "Come into the kitchen, sweetheart. We need to talk before dinner." Dad was already in the kitchen, along with a man I didn't recognise. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of watch that cost more than most people's cars. "This is Richard Stone. No relation," Mum said with a little laugh that sounded rehearsed. "He's our attorney. We have some wonderful news." The man placed a leather portfolio on the kitchen island and extracted a thick stack of papers. "Your parents have decided to gift you the family home," he said without preamble. "It's a very generous gesture, and we need to complete the transfer tonight for tax purposes. These are the deed transfer documents. We just need your signature on a few pages." I stared at the papers, my forensic accountant brain immediately going into overdrive. Something about this entire scenario felt wrong. The rushed timeline, the party before, the signing the presence of an attorney I'd never met. I picked up the documents and started reading. Really reading, not just skimming the way they clearly expected me to. That's when I saw it. Buried on page 7 in language designed to be deliberately confusing was a clause about assumption of existing liens and encumbrances on the property. In plain English, whoever signed this document would take ownership of the house and all the debt attached to it. I looked up at my father, who was pouring himself another whiskey, and my mother, whose smile had frozen in place. "What liens?" I asked quietly. "What debt comes with this house?" Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Just some small mortgages, nothing you need to worry about. We're giving you a $2 million property free and clear. You should be thanking us." But I knew the red flags of financial fraud when I saw them. If this were a client's case, I would already be documenting evidence of a scam. I set the papers down on the counter and said I need to review these documents properly. "I'm not signing anything tonight." The room went silent, except for the distant sound of the party in the living room. Dad's face turned red, the way it always did when someone challenged him. "I'm offering you everything, Emily," he said, his voice rising. "Everything we've built. And you're going to disrespect me like this. If you don't want it, I'll take it," Chloe said, appearing in the doorway. She'd clearly been listening. "God knows I could use a house. But Mum and Dad wanted you to have it because you're the responsible one. Though, honestly, you're being pretty ungrateful right now." That familiar suffocating guilt started rising in my chest, the same feeling that had made me say yes 1,000 times before, when I wanted to scream no. My mother's disappointed face, my father's anger, Chloe's tears, the weight of being the family disappointment if I didn't comply. For 29 years, that guilt had been my puppet strings, and they'd pulled them whenever they needed something from me. But this time, something was different. This time, I saw Chloe standing there in her $20,000 bag, bought with credit cards opened in my name. I saw my father's expensive watch, probably paid for with money he'd stolen from me. I saw my mother's perfectly manicured nails maintained while I worked 60-hour weeks to pay their bills. The guilt was still there, trying to make me comply like it always had. But underneath it, I felt something new. I looked at the attorney, then at my parents, then at the papers that would chain me to their mess. "I'm taking these upstairs to read them properly," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'll give you my answer when I'm done." Mum tried to protest, but I was already walking away, the papers clutched in my hand. I went up to my old bedroom, the one that had been converted into a guest room years ago, and locked the door. Then I did what I do best. I started investigating. The property deed showed the house was purchased in 1998 for $400,000. With appreciation, it should be worth around $2 million now, just like Dad said. But the mortgage history made my stomach drop. There wasn't just one mortgage. There were 3. The original mortgage had been refinanced twice. And just 6 months ago, they'd taken out a second mortgage for $500,000 at a predatory interest rate of 12%. The house wasn't an asset anymore. It was a financial black hole, and they were trying to transfer it to me. I pulled up the county assessor's website on my phone and searched for the property records. What I found made me feel physically ill. There was a foreclosure notice filed 2 weeks ago. The bank was scheduled to seize the property in 48 hours the day after tomorrow. This whole party, this whole charade about gifting me the house was a last-ditch effort to transfer a doomed property and all its debt into my name before the bank could take it. My hands were shaking as I kept digging. I hacked into Dad's email account using a password I'd seen him type years ago, the same password he used for everything because he was too arrogant to believe anyone would check. What I found in his sent mail made me realize this was so much worse than simple financial irresponsibility. There were emails to the attorney discussing strategies to transfer the property to me without my knowledge of the debt. There were emails to insurance companies increasing the fire insurance on the house to its maximum value. And then buried in a folder labeled personal, I found the email that made my blood run cold. It was from Dad to the attorney, dated 1 week ago. If Emily won't sign, we'll have to accelerate Plan B. The fire needs to happen before the foreclosure goes through. Once the deed is in her name, even if it's fraudulent, she'll be liable for everything. We'll be in Mexico before anyone figures it out. They were planning to commit arson. They were going to burn down the house for the insurance money after forcing me to take ownership, leaving me responsible for the mortgage debt on a destroyed property while they fled the country. And if I was in the house when it burned, well, that would just be a tragic accident, wouldn't it? I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process the magnitude of my parents' betrayal. These weren't desperate people making a bad decision. This was calculated, premeditated fraud, and I was the patsy. Every birthday card, every I love you, every time they'd called me their special girl, it had all been grooming. They'd spent years building me up as the reliable one, so they'd have someone to exploit when they inevitably destroyed their own lives. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly locked my phone. Someone tried the door handle, found it locked, and knocked. "Emily," Mum's voice called. "Honey, everyone's waiting. We need to sign the papers and make the announcement." I needed proof beyond the emails. If I was going to destroy my family and make no mistake, that's what I was about to do. I needed physical evidence that would hold up in court. I waited until I heard Mum's footsteps retreat, then I quietly unlocked my door and crept down the hallway toward the stairs. Instead of going down to the party, I headed to the second staircase, the one that led to the basement. The basement was unfinished, a sprawling concrete space filled with storage boxes and old furniture. But as I made my way through the darkness using my phone's flashlight, I noticed something strange. There was fresh paint on one of the walls, and the concrete floor had been recently cleaned in specific areas, bright spots standing out against the dingy grey. I found them behind a stack of boxes near the furnace. 5 red plastic jerry cans, the kind you use for gasoline. Each one was full, and the smell of fuel was unmistakable. There were also cardboard boxes filled with rags soaked in what looked like paint thinner. Everything was arranged and ready, a fire accelerant kit just waiting for someone to light the match. I was documenting everything with my phone's camera, taking pictures and video, when I heard the basement door open. Emily Chloe's voice echoed down the stairs. "Mum says to get your ass up here and stop being dramatic." I quickly moved behind the furnace, my heart pounding. Chloe's heels clicked on the stairs as she descended, muttering under her breath about how I was ruining everything. She had her phone out, the screen glowing in the darkness, and she was texting someone. Found her in the basement snooping around. Should I? I didn't wait to find out what should I meant. I stepped out from behind the furnace and said, "Looking for me." Chloe jumped, her phone clattering to the concrete floor. "What the hell, Emily?" She looked past me and saw the jerry cans I'd uncovered. Her face went pale, then red with anger. "Give me your phone," she hissed. "Right now. Give it to me." "No," I said, backing away. "Chloe, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with all of you?" She lunged at me with a fury I'd never seen from her before. "We're not going to let you ruin this," she screamed, grabbing for my phone. "Do you know what I owe? Do you know what happens to me if Mum and Dad go to jail? I lose everything. Everything." We struggled, and I shoved her away harder than I meant to. She stumbled backward into the stack of paint cans, falling hard and getting covered in the oily residue. Her designer dress was ruined, her hair was wild, and in that moment, she looked nothing like the pampered princess I'd always seen her as. She looked desperate and dangerous. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time while Chloe screamed behind me. She was yelling for Mum and Dad, telling them I'd assaulted her, that I'd found the gasoline, and I was trying to destroy the evidence. The narrative was already being twisted before I'd even reached the main floor. I could have left then. I should have just grabbed my coat and walked out the door, driven back to New York, and called the police from the safety of my apartment. But something in me had fundamentally changed. I was done running from these people. I was done making myself smaller to accommodate their dysfunction. If they wanted to play this game, fine. But they were going to play it by my rules now. I walked into the living room where all the relatives were gathered, waiting for the big announcement. My coat was still covered in snow from earlier. My hair was a mess, and I had a scratch on my face from where Chloe had clawed at me in the basement. Every eye turned to me as I entered, and the conversations died mid-sentence. Mum rushed over, her face a mask of concern. "Emily, sweetheart, what happened?" "Chloe says you attacked her." I ignored her completely. I walked to the entertainment centre, where Dad's pride and joy, an 85-inch television, dominated the wall. I pulled out the HDMI cable connected to the cable box and plugged in my phone instead. The screen flickered to life, mirroring my phone's display for everyone in the room to see. "What are you doing?" Dad said, moving toward me. "Emily, this isn't the time for..." I held up my hand to stop him. "Actually, Dad, this is exactly the time. Everyone wanted to be here for the big announcement tonight, right? Well, I've got some announcements of my own." I pulled up the first image on my phone, the foreclosure notice from the county website. "This," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "is the foreclosure notice filed on this property. Mum and Dad are losing the house in less than 48 hours. That's why they're so desperate to transfer it to me tonight." The room erupted in whispers. Aunt Patricia actually gasped. Uncle Jim looked at Dad with something between shock and admiration, as if he was impressed by the audacity of the scam. "That's not," Mum started, but I cut her off. I swiped to the next image, a screenshot of the credit card statements. "And these are the 5 credit cards opened in my name without my permission. $70,000 in debt that I didn't accumulate. Want to guess where this money went?" I looked directly at Chloe, who had just emerged from the basement, still covered in paint and looking like something from a horror movie. Her face went white as I swiped to the next image, a side-by-side comparison of the credit card charges and her Instagram posts. Same dates, same amounts, same items. My sister has been living a luxury lifestyle funded by identity theft, and my parents facilitated it. "This is ridiculous," Dad roared, his face purple with rage. "She's lying. She's trying to ruin us because she's jealous." I wasn't done. I pulled up the video I'd taken in the basement showing the jerry cans full of gasoline and the boxes of accelerant-soaked rags. "This is what I found in the basement just now. 5 cans of gasoline and fire accelerant all staged and ready. Want to tell everyone why you need this much fuel, Dad? Or should I share the email where you discussed burning down the house for insurance money after you tricked me into taking ownership?" The silence that fell over the room was deafening. You could hear the champagne bubbles fizzing in people's untouched glasses. Aunt Patricia slowly set her drink down on a coaster. Uncle Jim took a step away from Dad as if he might be contagious. "This isn't a celebration," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "This is a crime scene. You wanted to gift me this house. You wanted to make me responsible for your debt. And then you were going to burn it down and blame me. You were going to destroy my life to save yourselves from the consequences of your own choices." Dad moved toward me, his hands balled into fists. I was done being afraid of him. Two male cousins stepped between us, one of them putting a hand on Dad's chest. "Don't," he said quietly. "Just don't. Sir. Mum was crying now, but they were tears of rage, not remorse. "You ungrateful bitch," she spat. "After everything we've given you, after we raised you, fed you, loved you. This is how you repay us." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Loved me. You stole my identity. You've been using me as a financial backup plan my entire adult life. You raised me to be compliant so you'd always have someone to exploit. That's not love. That's not even close. Chloe, still dripping paint, started screaming that I'd attacked her, that I was crazy, that someone needed to call the police. Mum joined in, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch about how I was trying to frame them, how I'd always been jealous of Chloe, how I was mentally unstable and they were afraid for their safety. "The thing is," I said, raising my voice to be heard over their chaos, "I already called the police. And the FBI. About an hour ago, actually, when I found the evidence of wire fraud and identity theft. Those are federal crimes, by the way. So they should be here any minute." And, as if I'd written the script myself, red and blue lights began flashing through the windows. Car doors slammed. Heavy boots walked up the front step. The doorbell rang, formal and final. Dad tried to run for the back door, but two of my cousins blocked his way. The attorney, Richard Stone, attempted to slip out through the kitchen, briefcase in hand, but he found his exit cut off by more officers coming through the side entrance. I opened the front door to find 4 police officers and 2 FBI agents, all of them wearing expressions that said they'd seen this kind of thing too many times. One of the agents, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, looked at me and said, "Emily Carter." I nodded. "She's the complainant," she said to the officers. "The subjects are inside." I stepped aside as they entered, showing them the evidence I'd compiled on my phone. They had a warrant they'd been investigating my complaint for the past 6 hours, and they'd already obtained records from the credit card companies and the mortgage lenders. Everything I'd discovered was just confirmation of what they'd already begun to suspect. They read Dad his rights first, cuffing him, right there in front of all his friends and relatives. Fraud, identity theft, attempted insurance, fraud, conspiracy to commit arson. The charges seemed to go on forever. Mum was next, her mascara running down her face as she screamed about how this was all a misunderstanding, how her daughter was mentally ill, how we could work this out as a family. The FBI agent looked at her with something like pity and said, "Ma'am, we have the emails. We have the credit applications with forged signatures. We have the accelerants in the basement. There's no misunderstanding here." They took Chloe too, still covered in paint, still clutching her Birkin bag like it might save her. "Possession of stolen property," they said, "accessory to fraud." She looked at me with pure hatred as they led her past me, and I felt absolutely nothing. The attorney tried to claim privilege, but the agents explained very patiently that attorney-client privilege doesn't extend to planning crimes together. He went into the police car looking significantly less smug than he had an hour earlier. The party guests filed out in shocked silence. Some of them looked at me like I was the villain in this story, like I'd betrayed my family by refusing to let them destroy me. But a few, including one of my younger cousins, stopped to whisper that I'd done the right thing, that they'd always known something was wrong with how my parents treated me. I stood in the empty house after everyone had gone, looking at the abandoned champagne glasses and the paperwork still spread across the kitchen island, the deed transfer documents that would have ruined my life. I gathered them all up and fed them through the paper shredder I found in Dad's office. The sound was satisfying. 3 months later, I sat in my penthouse apartment in Manhattan, a space I'd been able to afford by finally keeping my salary for myself instead of sending it home. The apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, and I'd furnished it exactly the way I wanted, with modern art and comfortable furniture and not a single family photo in sight. The trials were scheduled for next spring. Dad and Mum were facing 10 to 15 years each. Chloe had taken a plea deal that included probation, community service, and paying restitution on the credit cards, though I doubted she'd ever actually pay me back. The house had been sold at auction for a fraction of its value, and the bank had written off the rest as a loss. I received a letter from Mum at the jail. It came in the mail with her inmate number printed on the return address, and I almost didn't open it. But curiosity won out. The letter was 3 pages of handwritten manipulation. She was sorry, she said, but only for getting caught. She needed money for her legal defense, for commissary for phone calls. She was my mother and I owed her. After everything they'd sacrificed to erase me, the least I could do was help them now. I read it twice, looking for any sign of genuine remorse, any acknowledgement of what they'd tried to do to me. There was nothing, just more demands, more guilt trips, more of the same patterns that had defined our relationship for my entire life. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed the fancy lighter I'd bought for the candles I never remembered to light. I held the flame to the corner of the letter and watched it catch fire. I dropped it in the marble ashtray I kept for decoration and watched the paper curl and blacken, Mum's handwriting disappearing into ash. It felt like closure watching her words turn to nothing. My laptop was open on the counter showing a travel website. I'd been looking at luxury resorts in Hawaii, trying to decide between Maui and the Big Island. I'd never taken a real vacation, not one that wasn't visiting family or attending some obligation. I was going to spend 2 weeks doing absolutely nothing except lying on the beach and remembering what it felt like to be free. I booked the trip first-class seats and an ocean view suite, using the money I'd been saving for the past 3 months by not supporting anyone but myself. The confirmation email popped up and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. My phone buzzed with the text from my therapist confirming our session for next week. I'd started seeing her right after the arrests, trying to unpack 29 years of manipulation and emotional abuse. She'd helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't normal family dysfunction. It was systematic exploitation, and I'd been groomed from childhood to accept it. I'd also started attending a support group for adult children of toxic parents. Hearing other people's stories, realizing I wasn't alone or crazy or ungrateful had been transformative. One woman in the group had said something that stuck with me. You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they're the ones who handed you the match. That's what my family had done. They'd handed me match after match, asking me to burn myself down to fuel their comfort, and I'd done it willingly because I thought that's what love looked like. It had taken almost becoming their victim one final time for me to realize that love doesn't look like that at all. I poured myself a glass of wine, expensive stuff I'd never have bought when I was sending half my paycheck home, and walked to the windows. The city stretched out below me, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each person carrying their own story of survival and resilience. I thought about the Emily who'd driven through that snowstorm 3 months ago, desperate for her parents' approval, willing to believe their lies one more time. That woman didn't exist anymore. She died in that basement surrounded by gasoline cans and the evidence of her family's betrayal. The person standing here now was someone new, someone who valued herself enough to refuse to be a victim. My cousin Rachel, the one who'd whispered encouragement to me that night, had reached out last week. She wanted to meet for coffee, to apologize for all the time she'd stayed silent when she saw how my family treated me. We had plans for next Tuesday, and I was looking forward to it. Maybe not all family connections were worth burning, just the toxic ones. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. To freedom, I said quietly. To boundaries. To knowing your worth. To never again confusing obligation with love. The view from up here was beautiful, and it was all mine. Family is supposed to be about love, about support, about building each other up instead of tearing each other down. It's not a bank account you can drain whenever you need something. It's not a scapegoat you can sacrifice to save yourself. And when the people who are supposed to love you most treat you like nothing more than a resource to be exploited, you have every right to close that account permanently. Some bridges aren't worth maintaining. Some are better off burned. So let me ask you, have you ever had to make the impossible choice between family loyalty and self-preservation? Have you ever realized that the people who claim to love you were actually destroying you piece by piece. Drop your story in the comments below because I guarantee you're not alone in this struggle. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped by toxic family dynamics, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to walk away from people who are hurting you, even if they're family, especially if they're family. Your mental health, your financial security, and your future matter more than maintaining relationships with people who see you as nothing more than a means to an end. Remember that.